My name is Jay. I am 54 years old, and I need to tell you about the night my whole world cracked open right there in the middle of a fancy Italian restaurant. My son Derek, 32 years old, had finally called me after months of silence. He said he had good news to share. I was so happy I could barely breathe. Then my phone buzzed. A text from a number I did not recognize. It said, "Get up and go. Do not say anything to your son." Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from tonight. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how a father discovered the truth about his own son. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I spent 30 years of my life as an industrial electrician. I started as an apprentice when I was 24 years old, fresh out of a community college program that cost me every penny I had saved from working at a gas station. Nobody in my family had ever done skilled trade work before. My father was a truck driver who was gone more than he was home. My mother worked at a laundromat until her back gave out. They did their best, but we never had much. When I got that apprenticeship, I thought I had won the lottery. I remember my first day on the job site, a paper mill outside of Phoenix, the smell of chemicals and hot metal, the roar of machines so loud you could feel it in your chest. The foreman handed me a hard hat and said, "Welcome to the real world, kid." He was not joking. Those early years were brutal. I worked in factories, power plants, construction sites. 12-hour shifts were normal. Sometimes I would work nights for weeks, straight sleeping during the day in a dark room with aluminum foil taped over the windows. My hands got rough. My knees started aching before I turned 30. But I never complained. Because every dollar I earned was a dollar for my future family. I met Linda when I was 25. She was a first-grade teacher at an elementary school near one of my job sites. I used to see her walking to her car every afternoon while I was on my lunch break. She had this way of smiling at her students that made me think she must have the kindest heart in the world. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to say hello. We got married when I was 26. A small ceremony at a church her family had attended for generations. Her parents were not thrilled about her marrying a man who came home with grease under his fingernails, but they came around eventually. Linda believed in me. She said she could see the man I was going to become. Derek was born 2 years later. The day he came into the world, I held him in my arms and made a silent promise. I swore I would give him everything I never had: stability, opportunity, a father who was present even when he was tired. For the first 12 years, I thought I was keeping that promise. I coached his little league team. I helped him with his homework, even when I did not understand the new math they were teaching. I took him fishing every summer at a lake about 2 hours outside the city. Those trips were sacred to me. Just the two of us sitting on the shore, waiting for a bite, talking about nothing and everything. But then things started to change. Linda and I started fighting about money. Not because we did not have enough, but because we had different ideas about how to spend it. She wanted to move to a nicer neighborhood. I wanted to save for Derek's college fund. Small disagreements turned into big arguments. I started taking more overtime shifts just to avoid coming home to the tension. The distance grew. Linda felt abandoned. I felt unappreciated. By the time Derek was 14, we both knew the marriage was over. The divorce was quiet. No screaming, no lawyers battling in court. We just sat down one evening after Derek went to bed and admitted we had become strangers living in the same house. I agreed to let Derek stay with Linda. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but I told myself it was the right one. She had a stable teaching job with regular hours. I was still working nights and weekends. A teenage boy needed consistency, not a father who was never home. I paid child support every single month. Never missed once. I also set up a separate savings account that Linda did not know about. Every month, I put a little bit of money into that account. My plan was to give it to Derek when he graduated college or when he got married or when he bought his first house, whichever came first. Over the years, that account grew to nearly $200,000. After the divorce, I tried to stay connected with Derek. Every other weekend was supposed to be my time with him. For a while, it worked. We would go to baseball games, eat pizza, watch movies. But as he got older, he started making excuses. He had homework. He had plans with friends. He had a girlfriend. The visits became monthly, then every few months, then almost never. I kept calling. I kept texting. I kept sending birthday cards with money inside. Most of the time, I did not even get a response. Linda told me not to take it personally. She said teenagers pull away from both parents. But it felt personal. It felt like my son was slowly erasing me from his life. I retired 2 years ago. My body was tired. My knees ached constantly. I had saved enough to live comfortably, and I figured it was time to rest. I bought a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix, nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom place with a little backyard where I could sit and watch the sunset. I thought retirement would be peaceful. Instead, it was lonely. I had a few friends from the old days, guys I used to work with who were also retired. We would get together for beers or go fishing sometimes, but most of my days were spent alone, watching television, reading, thinking about all the things I wished I had done differently. Then 3 weeks ago, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw Derek's name. My heart nearly stopped. I answered immediately. His voice sounded different, lighter, almost cheerful. He said he wanted to meet up for dinner. He said he had some good news to share, and he wanted to tell me in person. I was so shocked I could barely form words. After years of silence, my son was reaching out. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. The days leading up to that dinner were some of the most hopeful I had felt in years. I kept replaying the phone call in my head, trying to decode every word Derek had said. Good news. He had good news. Maybe he got promoted at work. Maybe he was getting married. Maybe he was going to have a baby and I was going to be a grandfather. I wanted to look my best for him. The morning of the dinner, I drove to a barbershop downtown and got a proper haircut for the first time in months. I had been cutting my own hair to save money, but this occasion deserved more. The barber was a young guy with tattoos covering both arms. He asked what the special occasion was. I told him I was meeting my son for dinner. He smiled and said that sounded nice. I did not tell him that my son had barely spoken to me for nearly a decade. I did not tell him that this dinner felt like a miracle. After the haircut, I went to a department store and bought a new shirt. Light blue button-down, nothing too fancy. I wanted to look like I had made an effort without looking like I was trying too hard. I also polished my good shoes, the leather ones I only wore to weddings and funerals. That evening, I left my house an hour early. The restaurant was in downtown Phoenix, a place called Rosario's. Italian food, white tablecloths, the kind of place that charges $20 for a plate of pasta. Derek had chosen it, which surprised me. Growing up, he always preferred diners and burger joints. I arrived 15 minutes before our reservation and asked the hostess for a table in the corner. I wanted some privacy. She led me to a nice spot by the window with a view of the street outside. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I sat there alone, rehearsing what I would say. I wanted to tell Derek how much I had missed him. I wanted to ask about his life, his job, his relationships. but I also did not want to overwhelm him. The last thing I needed was to scare him away again. At 7:15, Derek walked through the door. I barely recognized him at first. He was wearing a tailored gray suit with a silk tie. His hair was styled with product slicked back in a way that made him look like a businessman from a magazine advertisement. He had put on some weight since the last time I saw him, but he carried it well. I stood up as he approached the table. For a moment, neither of us knew what to do. Then I opened my arms, and he stepped into them for a brief hug. His body felt stiff, like he was going through the motions, rather than actually embracing me. But I did not care. I was just happy he was there. We sat down, and he immediately picked up the menu. The waiter came by, and Derek ordered a bottle of wine without asking what I wanted. It was an expensive bottle. I do not drink much, but I did not say anything. I just smiled and went along with it. "How have you been, Dad?" he asked. The question sounded strange coming from his mouth. He had not asked me that in years. I told him I was doing well. Retired life was quiet, but comfortable. I mentioned that I had taken up woodworking as a hobby, that I had built a birdhouse for the backyard. He nodded, but did not seem interested. I asked him about his life. He said he was working in real estate now. Commercial properties, big deals. He said he had just been promoted to regional director. That was the good news he wanted to share. I congratulated him. I told him I was proud of him, and I meant it. Even though we had grown apart, he was still my son. His success was my success in a way. The food arrived. He ordered a steak medium rare. I had the chicken parmesan. We ate in relative silence for a while, the conversation never quite finding a natural rhythm. I noticed that Derek kept glancing at his phone, which sat face up on the table next to his plate. Then my own phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a spam call or a text from one of my fishing buddies. Instead, I saw a message from a number I did not recognize. No name attached. I opened it. The words on the screen made my stomach drop. "Get up and go. Do not say anything to your son. He is not who you think he is. Go to the parking lot. Black sedan. I will explain everything." I read it twice, then a third time. My hands were shaking. I looked up at Derek. He was cutting his steak, chewing slowly, not paying attention to me. His eyes were fixed on some spot in the middle distance. Who sent this? How did they know I was here? What did they know about my son that I did not? 100 questions raced through my mind. I told myself it was probably a scam, some kind of prank. But something in my gut told me to listen. Something about the way Derek had been acting all evening, the stiffness in his hug, the way he avoided looking me in the eye. I put my phone back in my pocket and cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to use the restroom. I will be right back." Derek barely acknowledged me. He just nodded and kept eating. I walked past the restrooms and straight out the front door of the restaurant. The cool evening air hit my face. I looked around the parking lot, searching for the black sedan. It was parked in the far corner under a streetlight that flickered like it was about to die. The engine was off. The windows were tinted dark. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to turn back. Every instinct I had as a father told me to go inside and finish dinner with my son. But another part of me, the part that had spent 30 years reading situations and solving problems, told me something was very wrong. I walked toward the car. The rear passenger door opened before I reached it. Inside, I could see a figure sitting in the shadows. I took a deep breath and climbed in. The interior of the car smelled like leather and something floral, maybe perfume. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw a woman sitting on the opposite end of the back seat. She was in her early 30s with short brown hair cut just above her shoulders. Her face was pale and tense like she had not slept in days. She spoke before I could. "Mr. J, thank you for coming out. I know this must seem insane, but I had to warn you." Her voice was shaky but determined, like someone who had practiced what she was going to say but was still nervous. "Who are you?" I asked. She took a breath. "My name is Marissa. I was married to your son." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Married. Derek had been married, and I knew nothing about it. "That is impossible," I said. "Derek would have told me." Marissa shook her head slowly. "Derek does not tell you a lot of things. We were married for 3 years. We divorced 2 years ago. He never wanted you to know because he said you would ask too many questions." I sat there in stunned silence. My son had hidden an entire marriage from me. He had hidden a wife. Probably a wedding, a home, a whole life I was never invited to be part of. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "Because of what he is planning to do to you tonight." Marissa reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through some messages and then handed it to me. "Read these." I took the phone. The screen showed a text conversation between Derek and someone named Greg. I did not recognize the name, but I recognized the words. "The old man is about to take the bait. Tonight I will tell him a sad story. He is lonely and guilty. He will give the money right away." I read it again. My hands went cold. Another message further down said, "If he hesitates, I will mention how much I regret the years we lost." That always works on emotional types. I looked up at Marissa. My throat felt tight. "What is this?" She took the phone back. "Derek knows about your savings account, the one you have been putting money into for years. He found out somehow. Maybe from your ex-wife, maybe from bank statements, I do not know. But he told Greg he was going to come to dinner with you tonight and pretend he was in financial trouble. He was going to ask you for a loan, $150,000, maybe more. He had no intention of paying it back." I felt like the ground was opening beneath me. "How do you know this?" "Because he did the same thing to my parents." Marissa's voice cracked. "When we were married, Derek convinced my mother to invest $50,000 in one of his business ventures. He said it was a sure thing. He showed her paperwork, projections, everything. She gave him the money because she trusted him. Because I trusted him. 6 months later, the business never existed. The paperwork was fake. He spent the money on clothes, cars, trips. When my father found out, he had a heart attack. He survived, but he has never been the same." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I divorced Derek after that. He threatened to ruin my reputation if I talked. But I could not stay quiet when I found out he was coming after you. I have been watching him for months. When I saw him make the reservation at Rosario's, I knew he was making his move." I sat in silence for a long moment. Everything I thought I knew about my son was dissolving. The boy who caught his first fish with me at that lake. The teenager who used to laugh at my bad jokes. The young man whose graduation photo I kept framed on my living room wall. Was any of that real, or had I been blind all along? "Why did you help me?" I asked her quietly. Marissa looked at me with tired eyes. "Because when I was married to Derek, I saw how he talked about you. He called you a pushover. He said you were too sentimental to ever stand up for yourself. He made fun of the money you saved, said it was pathetic how you lived like a poor man just to hoard cash for a son who did not care about you." The words stung, but I did not interrupt. She continued. "I thought about my own father, how Derek had crushed him, And I thought about you sitting in that restaurant right now, believing your son finally wanted to reconnect. I could not let that happen. You deserve to know the truth before you give him anything. I looked out the window at the restaurant. Through the glass, I could see the table where Derek was sitting. He was on his phone now, probably texting Greg, updating him on the progress. So what do I do now? Marissa shrugged. That is your choice. You can walk away and never speak to him again. You can confront him. You can pretend nothing happened and see how far he goes with the lie. But at least now you know what you are dealing with. I thanked her. I meant it. Then I opened the car door and stepped back out into the night. The restaurant glowed in the distance. Inside, my son was waiting for me. He thought I was in the bathroom. He thought I would come back to the table, listen to his sob story, and open my wallet. He was wrong. I walked back toward the restaurant, but I did not go inside right away. I stood near the entrance, looking through the window at Derek. He was still on his phone, typing something. Every few seconds, he glanced up at the hallway that led to the bathrooms, probably wondering what was taking me so long. I had a choice to make. I could walk away right now, get in my truck and drive home, block his number, pretend this night never happened. Part of me wanted to do exactly that. The pain was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I did not trust myself to face him without saying something I would regret. But another part of me knew I would never forgive myself if I ran. I had spent too many years being silent, letting the distance grow, accepting scraps of attention from a son who only reached out when he wanted something. If I walked away now, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had stayed. So I went back inside. The hostess greeted me with a smile. I nodded politely and made my way back to the table. Derek looked up as I sat down. "You were gone a while," he said. His tone was casual, almost bored, like he did not really care where I had been. "Line was long," I said. He nodded and went back to his steak. I picked at my chicken but had no appetite. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The restaurant hummed with the sounds of other conversations, clinking glasses, soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. I watched Derek eat, trying to see past the mask he was wearing. Somewhere behind that polished exterior was the boy I used to know. Or maybe that boy never existed. Maybe I had invented him because I needed to believe I had done something right as a father. Finally, Derek put down his knife and fork. He dabbed his mouth with the napkin and looked at me with an expression that was supposed to seem vulnerable. "Dad, there is something I need to tell you." Here it comes, I thought. His voice got softer. "My business is in trouble. I know I told you things were going well, but the truth is I made some bad investments. A lot of bad investments. I am facing some serious losses. If I do not come up with a significant amount of money in the next few weeks, I could lose everything." He paused, waiting for my reaction. I said nothing. I just looked at him. He continued. "I hate to ask you this. I really do. You know I have always tried to handle things on my own. But I am desperate. I need a loan. $150,000. I will pay it back within a year, I promise. I will sign whatever paperwork you want." His eyes were wide, pleading. If I did not know better, I would have believed every word. But I did know better. "What exactly are these investments?" I asked calmly. He hesitated for half a second. Most people would not have noticed. But I had spent 30 years reading people in high-stakes environments. I knew when someone was making up an answer on the spot. "Commercial properties," he said. "A development deal that fell through." My partners pulled out at the last minute. "Who are your partners?" "A few guys. You would not know them." "What are their names?" He blinked. Dad, does it matter? The point is, I need help. I took a slow breath. What about Greg? Is he one of your partners? Derek's face changed. It was subtle, just a flicker, but I saw it. The confidence faded for a moment, replaced by something colder. How do you know about Greg? I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I found the screenshot Marissa had sent me before I got out of her car. A copy of the text messages between Derek and Greg. I read them out loud. The old man is about to take the bait. Tonight I will tell him a sad story. He is lonely and guilty. He will give the money right away. My voice did not shake. I said every word clearly, loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. Derek's face went white. Dad, that is taken out of context. That was a joke. I was being sarcastic. Was it also a joke when you did the same thing to Marissa's mother, $50,000, for a business that never existed? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I kept going. I spent 30 years working with my hands so you could have a better life. I saved every dollar I could for you. I put money into an account for 20 years, thinking one day I would surprise you with it. Help you buy a house. Start a family. Build something real. And this is what you planned for me, to sit here and lie to my face so you could steal from your own father. Derek's composure finally cracked. His jaw tightened. His eyes went dark. You do not understand, he said. You have no idea what my life has been like. You were never there. You think sending checks makes you a father. I was there every time you let me be there. I called you every week for years and you never picked up. I sent birthday cards you never acknowledged. I showed up to every graduation, every event you told me about. Do not rewrite history to justify what you were about to do. He slammed his hand on the table. You owed me. For all the years you were gone. For choosing your job over your family. You owed me. I looked at him for a long moment. The rage in his eyes. The entitlement. The complete lack of remorse. And then I did something I had never done before. I stood up. I reached into my wallet and pulled out enough cash to cover the meal. I placed it on the table. I looked my son in the eye and said, I am your father. I would have given you anything if you just asked, honestly. But you chose to see me as a target. That is something I cannot forgive right now. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I did not look back. I barely remember the drive home. The streetlights blurred past. The radio played some old country song I could not name. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a long time. The engine ticked as it cooled. The house was dark. I had forgotten to leave the porch light on. I went inside and did not turn on any lights. I walked straight to the living room and sat down in my old recliner. The one I had bought when I retired. The one that faced the wall where I had hung photos of Derek at various ages. First day of school, Little League uniform, high school graduation. I stared at those photos in the darkness until my eyes adjusted. The smiling boy, the proud teenager, the young man with his whole life ahead of him. Where did that boy go? When did he become someone capable of lying to his own father just to take his money? I did not sleep that night. I just sat there thinking, replaying every moment of the last 15 years, looking for signs I had missed. The next morning, I called Linda. We had not spoken much since the divorce. An occasional text about logistics, a brief phone call on holidays. But I needed to talk to someone who knew Derek as well as I did. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was cautious. Jay, is everything okay? I told her everything. The dinner, the text message, Marissa, the confrontation. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Jay, I am so sorry. I knew Derek had problems, but I did not know it was this bad." "What kind of problems?" she sighed. "He has borrowed money from me too, multiple times. He always had a reason, a business opportunity, an emergency. He promised to pay me back, but he never did. I stopped keeping track a long time ago. Why did you not tell me? Because I was embarrassed. And because I thought if I kept helping him eventually, he would get his life together." Her voice cracked. "I failed him, Jay. We both did." "No," I said firmly. "We did not fail him. We gave him everything we could. He made his own choices." There was silence on the line. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I do not know yet. But I am going to find out the truth. All of it." Over the next few days, I made some phone calls. I reached out to an old friend named Warren who had worked in commercial real estate for decades. I asked him to look into Derek's supposed career. Warren called me back 2 days later. His voice was hesitant. "Jay, I do not know how to tell you this, but your son does not work as a regional director. He was let go from his company 6 months ago. Officially, it was a layoff due to restructuring. But the word around the industry is that he was caught mishandling client funds. There might be a civil lawsuit pending." I thanked Warren and hung up. My son was not just a liar. He was a fraud. I contacted Marissa again. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment. She looked different in the daylight, tired but relieved, like warning me had lifted a weight off her shoulders. She told me more about Greg. He was not just a business partner. He was Derek's roommate. They had been running scams together for years. Small-time stuff at first. Fake investment opportunities targeting elderly people. Then bigger schemes targeting family members of people they knew. Marissa said Derek had learned how to read people. He knew how to make himself seem vulnerable. He knew how to exploit guilt and loneliness. He had turned manipulation into an art form. I asked her why she stayed with him for so long. "Because at first he was different with me," she said. "He was charming, attentive. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered to him. By the time I realized who he really was, he had already taken everything from my family." She looked at me with sad eyes. "Your son is not a bad person because of anything you did. Some people just choose to become who they are. You cannot save someone who does not want to be saved." I went home that night and sat on my back porch. The stars were bright. The desert air was cool. I thought about everything I had learned. My son was a con artist. He had lied to me, his mother, his ex-wife, and countless others. He had built his entire adult life on deception, and there was nothing I could have done to prevent it. The following week, I made an appointment with a lawyer named Patricia, who specialized in estate planning. Her office was in a tall building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like expensive wood polish and fresh coffee. I sat across from her desk and explained my situation. I told her about Derek, about the attempted scam, about everything I had discovered. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "What would you like to do with your assets?" "I want to change my will," I said. "I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, my son does not get a single dollar." She nodded. "That is absolutely possible. We can redirect your estate to other beneficiaries. Do you have anyone else in mind?" I thought about it. "I want most of it to go to a charity. Something that helps young people get into skilled trades. Electricians, plumbers, welders. Kids who do not have much, but are willing to work hard. I want to give them the chance I had." Patricia wrote something on her notepad. and the rest, a small portion for my ex-wife, Linda. She was a good mother to Derek even when I was not around. She deserves something for all those years. What about your son? Nothing at all, I paused. I will leave him $1. So he knows I did not forget him. But I will not fund his lies. Patricia finished the paperwork over the next few days. I signed everything and walked out of her office feeling lighter than I had in years. But I was not done yet. A week later, I called Derek. He answered on the first ring. His voice was cold. What do you want? I want to see you one more time. Not at a restaurant. At the fishing spot we used to go when you were 10. There was silence. Why? Because I have some things to say to you. And I want to say them in a place that meant something to both of us. He agreed. Reluctantly. The next Saturday I drove to the lake. It was a small body of water about 2 hours outside Phoenix. Not many people knew about it. That was why I had always loved it. Just me and the water and the silence. I arrived early and set up a folding chair near the shore. The same spot where Derek and I used to sit. I remembered teaching him how to cast a line. How excited he was when he caught his first fish, a tiny bluegill no bigger than my hand. He made me take a picture. Said he wanted to remember that moment forever. Derek showed up half an hour late. He parked his car on the gravel road and walked toward me with his hands in his pockets. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. No suit this time. No polished facade. He sat down on a rock a few feet away from me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I broke the silence. Do you remember coming here when you were a kid? He shrugged. Vaguely. You caught your first fish right over there. By that big rock. You were so proud. You made me take a picture. He did not respond. I kept going. I used to think those were the best days of my life. Just you and me. No worries, no complications. Just a father and his son. I looked at him. What happened to that boy? Derek's jaw tightened. That boy grew up and realized his father cared more about his job than his family. That is not true. Yes, it is. You were never there. Mom used to cry at night because she felt so alone. And when you finally came home, you were too tired to do anything. You gave us money, but you never gave us you. I let him speak. I did not interrupt. You think you were some kind of hero because you worked hard, you were absent. You missed birthdays, school, plays, football games. And then when you and Mom split up, you just walked away, like it was nothing. I chose to let you stay with your mother because I thought it was best for you. I was working nights. I could not give you stability. You could have tried harder. I tried every week for years. You stopped returning my calls. Because I was angry. I was a kid, and I was angry at you for leaving. I understand that I said. I understand why you were angry. But Derek, you are not a kid anymore. You are a grown man. And what you did at that restaurant, what you have been doing to other people, that is not anger. That is something else. He looked away. I spoke slowly and clearly. I came here to tell you a few things. First, I changed my will. The money I saved for you is no longer yours. It will go to charity. To help young people who want to learn a trade. His head snapped back toward me. You cannot do that. I already did. His face twisted. That is my money. You saved it for me. I saved it for my son, the son I thought you were. Not the man you became. He stood up. This is insane. You are punishing me for trying to survive. No. I am protecting myself from someone who sees me as a target. He started pacing. You do not understand what I have been through. The pressure, the debt. I made some mistakes, but I was going to pay you back. Like you paid back Marissa's mother. He froze. I kept going. I know about the $50,000. I know about the fake business. I know about Greg. I know about the lawsuit. His face went pale. You have been spying on me. I have been listening to people who cared enough to tell me the truth. He had nothing to say. I stood up and walked toward him. I put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but did not pull away. Derek, I love you. I have always loved you. That has never changed. But love does not mean I let you destroy me. If you ever truly change, if you ever want to rebuild your life honestly, I will be here. But until then, I cannot be part of whatever you are doing. He looked at me with something I had not seen in his eyes for a long time. Confusion. Maybe even shame. I squeezed his shoulder once, then let go. Take care of yourself. I walked back to my truck and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Derek still standing by the shore. He had not moved. The months after that conversation were hard. There were nights when I woke up in a cold sweat dreaming about that restaurant, about the look on Derek's face when I read his text messages out loud, about the silence that followed. But slowly, something shifted. I started spending more time at the community center near my house. They had a program for at-risk youth kids from tough neighborhoods who needed direction. When they found out I was a retired electrician, they asked if I would be willing to teach a few classes. I said yes. Those classes became the highlight of my week. Most of the kids had never held a wrench before. They did not know the difference between a circuit breaker and a light switch. But they were eager to learn. They showed up on time. They asked questions. They wanted to build something with their hands. I taught them the basics. How to strip a wire. How to read a diagram. How to stay safe around electricity. But more than that, I tried to teach them about discipline. About showing up even when you do not feel like it. About earning respect through hard work. One kid in particular stood out. His name was Marcus. 17 years old, tall and quiet, with a scar above his left eyebrow from a fight he never talked about. He had dropped out of school the year before and was living with his grandmother because his mother was in prison. Marcus was skeptical of me at first. He thought I was just another old guy trying to tell him what to do. But over time, he started to trust me. He stayed after class to ask extra questions. He took notes in a little notebook he carried everywhere. One afternoon, he asked me why I was doing this. Why I was spending my retirement teaching strangers for free. I told him the truth. Because I have a son who made bad choices, and I spent too many years thinking I could fix him by giving him money. But you cannot fix someone by giving them things. You fix them by giving them skills, by giving them purpose, by showing them they matter. Marcus nodded slowly. You sound like my grandma, I laughed. Your grandma sounds like a smart woman. She is. She says people do not change unless they want to. She is right. Marcus became my unofficial assistant. He helped me set up equipment, organize supplies, keep the younger kids in line. By the end of the year, he had earned his GED and gotten a job as an apprentice at an electrical company downtown. The same company where I had started 30 years earlier. I was at his grandmother's house when he got the call telling him he was hired. She started crying. Marcus tried to play it cool, but I saw him wipe his eyes when he thought no one was looking. That moment was worth more than any amount of money I had ever saved. Around that time, I also made a new friend. His name was Harold, a widower in his mid-60s who volunteered at the same community center. He taught woodworking to the kids who were not interested in electrical work. Harold and I started meeting up on weekends. We would drive out to the lake and fish for hours without saying much. He had his own story with his children. a daughter who blamed him for her mother's death, a son who had moved overseas and never called. We did not give each other advice. We just listened. Sometimes that is all you need. Someone who understands what it feels like to love your children and lose them anyway. One evening, Linda called me. She sounded different, softer. "Jay, I wanted to let you know something. Derek has been seeing a therapist. He reached out to me a few weeks ago and apologized for everything. He said he is trying to get his life together." I listened without interrupting. "I do not know if it is real this time," she continued. "He has said things like this before, but he seemed different, more humble." I thanked her for telling me. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "If Derek truly changes, he knows where to find me. But I am not going to chase him anymore. I spent too many years doing that." Linda was quiet for a moment. "You sound different too," she said. "Stronger." "I do not know about stronger, but I am tired of carrying other people's weight. I have my own life to live." We talked for a few more minutes and then said goodbye. I sat on my back porch that night and watched the stars. The air was warm. The desert was quiet. I thought about Derek, about whether his apology to Linda was real or just another performance. I hoped it was real. I hoped he had finally looked in the mirror and seen what he had become. But I also knew I could not make that happen. I could not force him to change. All I could do was leave the door open and wait. And if he never walked through it, that was okay too. Because I had finally made peace with who I was. I had done my best. I had worked hard. I had saved money. I had shown up every time I was allowed to show up. My worth was not measured by how my son treated me. I mattered. My life mattered. And I deserved to be at peace. That night I slept better than I had in years. It has been almost a year since that dinner at Rosario's. A year since I read those text messages out loud and watched my son's mask fall away. A year since I walked out of that restaurant and started rebuilding my life without him. I still think about Derek every day. Not with anger anymore, just with a kind of quiet sadness. The sadness of a father who loves his child but cannot reach him. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had given him the money that night. If I had ignored the text message and played along with his story. Maybe he would have taken the $150,000 and disappeared. Maybe he would have come back for more. Maybe we would still be playing this game, him pretending to need me and me pretending not to notice. But I did not ignore the message. I chose to see the truth even when it hurt. And that choice saved me. Not just financially. It saved me from spending the rest of my life being used by someone who saw me as a resource rather than a person. It saved me from dying bitter and resentful. It saved me from losing myself entirely in the pursuit of a relationship that was never going to be what I wanted it to be. I learned something important this year. Something I wish I had understood a long time ago. Being a good parent does not guarantee a good child. You can do everything right and still end up with a son who lies to your face. You can sacrifice everything and still be seen as the enemy. That is not a failure. That is just life. And loving someone does not mean you let them hurt you. Love is not a blank check. Love is not permission to be exploited. Love can be strong and protective at the same time. Sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is step back and let go. But stepping back is not the same as giving up. It is giving yourself the space to breathe, to heal, to live. I do not know what the future holds for me and Derek. Maybe one day he will knock on my door. Not to ask for money, not to run another scam, just to say he is sorry. just to sit on the porch with me and watch the sunset like we used to do when he was small. Maybe that day will never come, but either way, I am okay. I have my health. I have my friends. I have my work at the community center. I have kids like Marcus who remind me that not every story ends in disappointment. I have peace, and that is more than enough. If you are watching this and you are a parent going through something similar, I want you to know this. Your love is not wasted just because it is not returned. Your sacrifices are not meaningless just because they are not appreciated.